Hello my sweet friends, welcome back. We have another monthly wrap-up, October monthly wrap-up. Guys, I'm trying to be festive. The one October-y decoration that I have in my house currently. It is quite cute though, quite cozy. I read 15 books this month and I honestly had such a great reading month in terms of like ratings. I had 2 3-star reads and apart from those 2, everything was 4 stars or above, which is pretty crazy. As for a couple of stats, got my little journal here. We have 1 non-fiction, 3 fantasy books, 9 romance books, which is kind of crazy because last month I read literally 2 romance books and this month I read 9. I'm definitely back in my romance era, my romance reading era. We'll see if that continues next month. I honestly don't know. I'm still very much enjoying the romance books and then the rest of them are kind of just like general fiction, I guess. I think today I'm going to go in the order that I read the books. So I started off the month with my only non-fiction book that I read, which was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Juniper Hill. I won't talk about this one too much because it feels like everyone has read this and honestly, rightly so. I actually listened to the audiobook on Audible because Juniper Hill herself narrates it and I love listening to memoirs when the narrator is the person that wrote the memoir, I guess. Because you get to hear the book and hear the words exactly how they were meant to be heard and meant to be read. And so I think there's just something very special about an audiobook memoir. Personally, I don't rate memoirs because I don't feel right rating someone's life story, but I will say that I 100% recommend it. The writing was phenomenal. Although I do recommend it, it is definitely a very heavy read, as you can probably assume by the title. It does go through her abusive relationship with her mother, a really dysfunctional family dynamic. Jeanette dealt with a lot of really difficult situations, so there are a lot of trigger warnings. I would definitely check them out before going into this book if you think it could be a triggering experience for you. But in saying that, I just think it's so worth it. It was such an amazing read and I'm really glad that I read it this month. Moving on, the next book that I read was Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, which is her newer release. I borrowed this from the library and I honestly really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars and I will say I think I went into it with the right expectations. Like I went into this book being like, oh, I just want something light and fun and just a really cheesy rom-com. And that's exactly what it was, and it is nothing more. I've seen a lot of people have issues with this book and I will say I definitely had my issues with it. I did a reading vlog that included me reading this book and you can watch that if you want to see my thoughts more in detail. But overall, it was just fun. It was cheesy. It was very similar to The Love Hypothesis, but I was just in the mood for that. And so I personally really enjoyed it, but I can totally see why some people didn't. My recommendation would be if you're going to read it or you want to read it, just go in with the expectation that it's probably just going to be a very light-hearted, fun rom-com. Nothing too revolutionary, nothing too crazy, but it is just a fun time. A great palate cleanser, I think. The next book that I finished was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is my first R.F. Kuang book and wow, this did not disappoint. I rated this one 4.5 stars. I think the only reason it wasn't a 5-star read for me, it just didn't have that like total 5-star feeling. There were some parts that were a little bit slower and it's one of those books that I think you really have to concentrate on when you're reading it. Like it's not something you can kind of just like read and like not really think about. Like you need to be paying attention to this book and it doesn't look super long, but it felt quite long, but also it was fantastic, like so great. But basically there is a young girl, Rin, who grows up in a really difficult home. She ends up going to a very prestigious academy by really just working her butt off to get there. And in that like a school academy situation, she learns how to fight, she learns to be a soldier, she learns to be this really incredible young woman, I guess. And there's so much more that happens, but I feel like I can't say anything else without kind of ruining the story. But it really is just such a, like you see so much growth in this story and in this character. She starts off as this really young girl and she just ends up being this really like powerful woman and I just loved, I don't know, it was just so good. It was really good. And I have started the second one and I'm about like halfway through. I'm kind of reading it a little bit slower because it is just like a lot to take in. And I will say also, I actually don't know if this is technically YA or adult. I want to say it's adult, like it kind of reads adult to me, but also she's a younger character, so maybe it is YA. Okay, it doesn't say that it's YA, so I'm assuming it's adult. I would probably not recommend this to younger audiences just because it is, I don't want to say it's dark, but there's a lot of bad stuff that happens and it's quite grim, it's quite, I guess, sad. There's a lot of war, there's a lot of politics. So it's not like a fun, light-hearted adventure story at all. Like there's a lot. And there's a lot of trigger warnings in this book as well, which I would definitely check out, but still very worth it. The writing is so beautiful. So beautiful. The next book that I finished was Clean by Juno Dawson. This is a YA, I would argue that it's like general fiction. It does have a little bit of romance in it, but I think I said this in my reading vlog where I talked about this book. I almost wish it didn't have romance in it because I feel like the story without romance honestly would have been stronger. But it's basically about this young woman who is having a lot of issues with drug addiction, and her brother checks her into quite a like exclusive, prestigious rehabilitation clinic with a bunch of other young people facing all kinds of mental illnesses, addictions, and just difficulties, I guess. And it just goes through the process of her dealing with her addiction, withdrawals, coping mechanisms, all of the things that she faces along the way, and then what life looks like after the rehab, and then all the things that come along with all of that. It was honestly really interesting. I don't think I've read anything like that before. There were definitely elements of found family and a lot of character development, which I loved. I rated this one 4 stars. It was great. There were a few things that I wish were a little bit different, hence why it's not 5 stars, but overall it was just such an interesting read. But I will say it was difficult at times to read because it deals with such heavy topics, and not only is she obviously dealing with her drug addiction, but all of the characters around her are all dealing with so many other issues that it's just like heavy topics all the time. And there were just some characters that were really hard to read about because they were just really struggling, and it was just sad. It was just like a sad book to read at some points. So I wouldn't be reading this book if you're like not doing well. I feel like that's just like not the type of book you need to be reading at that point. Overall, I found it very interesting and honestly quite insightful as well. As someone who's never really dealt with drugs or drug addiction, it was just interesting and gave me a better, I hope, perspective on what that might look like for someone and kind of just like how real that issue is. But overall, I really enjoyed it and I would definitely recommend. Next up, I read my first Mariana Zapata book. I read All Roads Lead Here on my Kindle, and it was so good. I rated it 4.5 stars. If for some reason you haven't heard about All Roads Lead Here, it is small town, single parent trope, forced proximity. Basically, we have Aurora, who has just walked away from a really, really long-term relationship that was just so infuriating. Like her ex-partner is just awful, just a not nice person. She finally walks away from that and moves back to her hometown where she grew up for the first, I don't know, maybe like 15, 16 years of her life. And she moves into the upstairs, almost like granny flat type of situation above a garage on a property owned by this guy called Rhodes. And Rhodes is a single dad who has a teenage son, and he is just so grumpy, and Aurora is, I would say it's Grumpy Sunshine. Yeah, she's definitely more of a sunshine type of personality, but it's just such a beautiful story. It dealt with so much more than just a romance. It was definitely a long book, but so worth it. I feel like I haven't really heard anything negative about this book, and I'm definitely just adding to the positive reviews because I really loved it, and I definitely want to check out more Mariana Zapata in the future. Next, we have probably my least favorite book from the month, and that is Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. I am really glad that I read this because it's just been on my TBR for a while, and honestly, I'm really sad that I didn't enjoy this because I overall quite enjoyed Leanne Moriarty's writing, and I've read like maybe 3 or 4 of her other books and really enjoyed them all, and this was just not it. And this is her newest release, so I'm kind of shocked by that because you would assume it would be her best writing yet, but the story just fell so flat for me. It was definitely the most boring book that I've ever read by her. I feel like her books are usually just quite interesting, and the concepts and the plot lines are so interesting, but this was just simply boring to me. It just felt like it was almost like too real. Like this story could have just happened to your like next door neighbor, or like someone who lived down the street from you, and you're just like hearing your neighbor talk to you about it because it was just like so mundane and just like not in a good way. I did rate it 3 stars, so it wasn't absolutely awful, but would I go out of my way to recommend this? Absolutely not. It just wasn't for me. I can see why people would enjoy it, but for me, it just didn't live up to other works by this author. The next book that I picked up was Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry. This was so good. I rated this 5 stars. This is a small town romance, but it has a really good plot, and that is my favorite type of romance. Like if you give me a romance that has an actual like decent plot, I will probably love you forever. And I also just love small town romances as well. This is the first like proper book in the Eden series, which is a series by Devney Perry about the Edens, who are a very established family in this small town called Quincy. I'm pretty sure one of the original Edens helped discover Quincy or something along those lines, and now the Edens are just a really, really well-known family. And so the Edens family is made up of 6 siblings, 3 boys, 3 girls, obviously all different ages, and each sibling is eventually going to have their own book in this series. So the first book starts with Griffin, who is the eldest son, and he helps run the ranch that his parents own. And one day he walks into a bar, he meets this girl. A lot of tourists come through this town, and he assumes that this girl, or lady I should say, is a tourist. That lady is Winslow, who is not in fact a tourist, but is actually about to start as the chief of police in Quincy and has like just moved there. So they meet in this bar, they get to know each other, if you will, and then the next day they realize like who each other is, and they're both like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Because she's kind of like, I am chief of police, like I cannot be like forming any sort of relationship with the townspeople, I guess, until I've really established myself and kind of gained the respect of the townspeople. And Griffin is obviously like, I don't want a relationship, I only go on dates with tourists because there's like nothing keeping me there, there's no commitment, I guess. But right at the beginning of this book, on like one of the first days Winslow becomes the chief of police, she goes out to the ranch because there has been a death and they've found a body on the ranch that Griffin's family owns, and it's not the first death that has, I guess, appeared at the ranch. And so there's this huge mystery element of the book of kind of like, who has done this? Is anyone involved in this? Is this suspicious, or is it like all a coincidence? It's really interesting. I loved the mystery aspect of it, and I think that's really what made the book for me, because whilst there was obviously this romance going on, there was also this really great mystery. I personally definitely recommend it, and also all of these books are on Kindle Unlimited at the moment, so if you have a Kindle, definitely check it out. And then after that, I looked up the reading order of that series, realized that I'd missed the first book, which is actually a novella, like a little prequel novella almost, which is called Christmas in Quincy. It's just a tiny little like 100-page, basically like Christmassy romance that does not involve kind of indirectly involves the Edens, but does not directly involve any of the Edens. So it feels a little bit unnecessary. I definitely do not think you need to read that little novella. I did read it because it's free on Kindle Unlimited, but I didn't want to buy the physical copy because I was like, it's just not worth it. So if you're going to read this series, I actually recommend starting with Indigo Ridge and then reading the little novella. I feel like it won't hook you the same way that the first book did, and I feel like it doesn't like set up the series very well, in my opinion. So I gave that one 3 stars. It was fine, but I almost was just like, why is this a thing? It doesn't directly involve any of the Edens. Like, why is this like the first book of the Edens series? The novella is referenced in future books, but very, very like minutely. Like, it's almost just like, oh, I know that name, and oh, I know those characters, but like it doesn't impact your reading experience really at all. Moving on. Then I picked up Juniper Hill, which is technically like the second book in the Eden series, if we're not including the like novella situation. And this is the second eldest son's story. His name is Knox, and he is like super grumpy. So we have like a grumpy sunshine situation. Again, small town romance. He is a chef, and I loved Knox. From what I've gathered, this is a lot of people's favorite book in the series so far, and I rated this 4.5 stars. So I actually enjoyed this one more, but I think it was because the plot was stronger. So I enjoyed the plot more in this book, but I enjoyed the romance more in this book. We also have single parent trope in this one as well. So if you liked All Roads Lead Here, I would really recommend reading this. You can read all of these books as standalones, but if you do read them out of order, it will probably give spoilers as to like who the other siblings end up with and like who their romances are. So beware of that. In this story, we have Memphis, who is a single mom to a little baby boy, and she moves to Quincy because she is starting a job there, but there are like no rentals available. So she ends up renting pretty much a small like apartment unit situation that is on Knox's property, and obviously forced proximity, they get to know each other. You can guess what happens. Grumpy Sunshine, really cute. I just love that he's a chef, because chef love interests, they almost always have like an acts of service love language, and that is my love language. And so when I get to like read about like love interests that are just like super like service oriented and like they just do all these nice things for the girl, that is my absolute favorite. So I really enjoyed this, but it just felt a little bit flat in the middle. I felt like it started really well and it ended really well, but like right in the middle it just felt a little bit like boring to me in terms of plot. And of course I continued the series by reading Garnet Flats, which is the third book, and this is Talia Eden's story. So she is the eldest daughter, and this is a second chance romance. I think I rated this one 4 stars. It was okay, but it just wasn't quite as good as the first 2 books in my opinion. I felt like the guy in this story just like, I don't know, there was just something missing for me. It was still a really good story and really enjoyable, and I think that any books in this series I'm really going to enjoy because you get to see all of the other characters from the previous stories, and you just get to know this town and the townspeople so well that I just like can't imagine disliking a story in this series. But yeah, this one just wasn't as strong for me. So in this one, Talia met Foster, I think when they were in college, and they dated for a little over a year, and they were so in love, and then something happened. She moved home to Quincy. She's also a doctor. Love that for her. And they literally haven't spoken since. And then one day Foster shows up in Quincy and is basically like, I want to be with you, I love you. And she's like, what are you talking about? You treated me so bad. Like, I do not understand. But he has this whole explanation, and he is so determined to like win her back. And so there's a lot of groveling involved, and it's a fun story. But yeah, not my favorite in the series, but definitely good. Definitely still worth the read. And look how pretty they all look together on your bookshelf. So cute. And I'm pretty sure the next book comes out in a couple months. Like, it's kind of soon, so it's a good time to start the series in my opinion. The next 2 books that I read were It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. It Ends With Us was a reread for me. I read it for the first time around 2 years ago, and then obviously this is Colleen Hoover's newest release, and I'm sure you'll see this in everyone's wrap up this month because it just felt like everyone was reading this, which is super fun. I did a whole reading vlog for both of these books, so I'll link that down below if you haven't seen it already, and you can see like my really in-depth thoughts. But overall I rated these both 5 stars. I really thoroughly enjoyed these. But yeah, I feel like this book has had quite polarizing reviews, which is really interesting to me because like I said, I loved it. I rated it 5 stars, but a lot of people, yeah, are not really impressed by it. I think the reason why I enjoyed this so much, first of all, if you are an Atlas girly, you will love this because it has so much of Atlas in it, and that's kind of the whole point. And also, it seemed like a lot of people wanted a different kind of story. A lot of people were like, I wanted a plot twist, I wanted a really crazy storyline, because that is quite classic Coho. But literally on the first page, like when you start the book, there is an author's note that says, dear reader, this is going to be a lighter experience. She's basically saying, I never intended to write the sequel. There was never going to be a sequel, but obviously in the last couple of years it has like popped off and people were begging for a sequel. So she kind of wanted to give people the happily ever after that they were begging for in this book. And so that's what she produced. She literally wrote this book for the people. It is not a book for the plot, it is a book for the people. And she literally said that in the author's note right at the beginning. And so I think once I read that, I was really expecting just a very beautiful, fun, cheesy, cutesy love story. And that is what was given to us. There was not a crazy plot, there was not a crazy plot twist, but I also still felt like the plot was good. And I actually really enjoyed what Colleen Hoover did with it and what she did with the characters, what she did with the story. So I'm just really shocked that people were so unhappy with this. But that is just my opinion, and obviously we can all have different opinions on different books, and that is so fine. Like, I have no issue with people who didn't enjoy it, but it was exactly what I wanted, and I'm really happy with what I got, and I'm glad that I'm satisfied, I guess. Then I picked up another romance book, which was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and this was 5 stars from me. It was so good. I'm so mad that it's taken me this long to pick it up. I actually originally got it from the library, but I had to return it before I had finished reading it, so I ordered my own copy because I was just loving it so much. I was like a little over halfway, and I couldn't re-borrow the book because someone else had already reserved it, and so I was like, I have no choice but to buy this so I can finish it. And it just did not disappoint at all. I have read every book that Abby Jimenez has released thus far. The Friend Zone, I think I gave like 2 stars. The Happy Ever After playlist, I rated 4 stars. Life's Too Short, I rated 5 stars. And this, I rated 5 stars. So I'm kind of hoping that her writing is just going to continue to get better and better. But I honestly think this is her best work yet. I just thought it was super wholesome, super beautiful. There is spice in it, but like the story itself is so wholesome. It's basically about a lady who is a doctor and a guy who is from a small town, and he owns like kind of like a bed and breakfast kind of vibe, and they just like very randomly meet, and they're both kind of like, we don't want relationships, we don't want to be committed, but they just keep seeing each other and keep spending time together, and watching them fall in love is so beautiful. It's definitely like guy falls first, but because they're from such different lives, they are just finding it really difficult to decide like what they're gonna do, because once they do fall in love, they're kind of like, wait, like we live 2 hours away. The girl lives in a big city. She's a doctor. She's very established. And the guy is actually the mayor of the small town and very involved in the town, and obviously owns the like bed and breakfast situation. And so both of them are just like, how are we going to compromise and make this work, because we both kind of like love our lives so much. And I remember getting to a point in this book where I was like, I actually don't know how the author is going to like make this work. Like, I do not know how these characters are going to end up together, because it just felt like an impossible situation. But it was a beautiful, happy ending. It was just so well done. I don't know if I have any faults or any like issues with this book, which is kind of shocking. But yeah, 5 stars from me, and I'm really excited because she's bringing out another book very soon that is based on one of the side characters in this story, and I cannot wait to read that one. And the last 2 books that I read this month were Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, and I did the tandem read, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of proud of myself because it was a little bit tedious. It was. I do think it's worth it, and I do think I would recommend to other people. Obviously, I haven't done it the other way. Like, technically in the reading order, you would read this one and then you would read this one, but you can also read them as a tandem read. So a few chapters of this one, a few chapters of this one. I'll link down below the tandem order that I followed and the like website, I guess, that I like followed that kind of outlines which chapters to read in which order, and that was so helpful. It definitely took me a minute to get through these, because it basically is, when you're doing tandem, it basically feels like you're reading a book that is this long, both over 600 pages, so it kind of felt like you're reading a 1200 page book. But I didn't rush it, and I kind of just like spread it out all throughout the month, and it was a really enjoyable experience to me. And it's really interesting because a lot of people do not like Tower of Dawn, but I really enjoyed it. I felt like the plot was really well done, and I wasn't expecting a lot from this because so many people don't like it. And I know it's a lot to do with like the characters involved as to why people don't like it. It's very hard to discuss a book that's like at the end of a series, because obviously you can't really say anything without it being a spoiler. But overall, really enjoyed these. So worth the read, and I do think the tandem read is worth it. Like I said, a little bit tedious, but really not that bad. Both of these were 5-star reads for me. I'm not really surprised at that, and I can't believe I only have 1 book left in the Throne of Glass series. I think this might be, oh no, I guess not. I was going to say it might be the longest series that I've ever read, but I guess the Addicted series might be the longest one. However, I do have something to admit. I did say I was going to do a reading vlog showing my like process and my experience doing the tandem read, and I did try to film it, but because I read it over the course of a month, it just didn't work. The footage I got was just not good. Originally I was like, oh, I'm not gonna do spoilers, but then it's basically impossible to not do spoilers when you're at like the 6th and 7th book of a series. But then it was like I started doing spoilers like halfway through. It just wasn't good. So I scrapped it, and I'm so sorry if you were looking forward to that reading vlog, but it didn't happen. But like I said, if you are considering doing the tandem read, I 100% recommend it, because as people say, there is a fairly big like cliffhanger, I guess, at the end of Empire of Storms. And if you're actually reading them in order, you read this one and then you read this one. And if you finish this one, you will not want to go and start this one. You will not want to. You'll want to just jump straight to Kingdom of Ash. So I think the tandem read is, 100% worth it. And it also just allowed you to see all the characters all the way through, because these characters are not involved in this book. These characters are not involved in this book. So it allows you to have all the characters throughout your whole experience, because you're going back and forth. But those are all the books that I read in October. I honestly had such a great reading month. I had so much fun. If I had fun, that means it was a great reading month for me. And if I come out with like some highly rated books, that is a great reading month to me. So I feel like I always say this, but I feel like it's so important. Whether you get through 0 books a month or 30 books a month, if you are having fun and if you're having a good time, that is literally the most important thing. And if you had fun reading, that is a successful reading month. I literally cannot believe that we only have 2 months left of this year, and I have so many books that I still want to get to this year. But I think my next video will be my November TBR, and I'm gonna do something a little bit different this month. So definitely make sure you're subscribed so you can see that when it comes out in a few days. But I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.